welcome to the AP Arms. Thank you so much for being here.
No, thanks for having me, Paul. It's good to be here. Thank you.
So yeah, the AP Arms, this is our Xelix's concept. It's a pub for finance professionals, finance enthusiasts to talk about topics around GBS, AP, P2P, technology transformation, things like that. So thanks so much for joining. Let's kick off with intros. So maybe could you share a little bit about you, your background, and what you've been up to?
Sure, of course. So my name is Phil Spence. I'm the founder of 2905 Limited, a management consultancy. I've been in shared services for about 15 years or so now. I've spent a significant amount of that time in sort of like a transformational space, managing the transformation of AP and Procure-to-Pay. And most recently, I spent 18 months or so designing a European Procure-to-Pay platform and way of working that spanned 19 different countries and consolidated and rationalized ways of working in the P2P workstream. Excellent.
And where are you based, Phil? Where do you live?
I'm based in Sturbridge, so southwest Birmingham. It's a lovely part of the world. We've got some lovely greenery for walks and cycling, and some tow paths close by as well. So it's a very fortunate spot for a little bit of outdoor activity, but it's close enough into Birmingham that I can be there in 30 minutes on the train.
Nice. And I guess for our non-UK listeners, maybe they're thinking Peaky Blinders, maybe they're picking up on the accent.
I hope they don't pick up on the accent, but being my ancestral home is Newcastle, so I'll get lots of stick from the family if I develop a Black Country accent. But certainly Peaky Blinders is this neck of the woods for sure.
Yeah, nice. So before we get into the kind of detail around Procure-to-Pay, we're going to talk about kind of some of the efficiency you drove in that function. Just a bit of light-hearted fun. Favorite pub and why?
Favorite pub is called the Wagon and Horses on Worcester Street in Sturbridge, and if I look out of my office window, I'd be able to see it. It's quite a cute independent pub. Really good ales, really good ciders and lagers. They make homemade sausage rolls, Scotch eggs, cobs. So it's a fabulous little pub that I do enjoy going to.
Excellent, great. Well, thank you, Phil. So yeah, let's get into the meat of the call then. So you're going to kind of share with the audience your experience around driving P2P efficiency, and you've got a really good story to tell about kind of a before state and after state in the previous role. So yeah, we'd love to hear more, and I'll chip in with questions.
Sure. So it's essentially, one of my roles in years gone by was supporting the transformation of an AP department where, through exponential growth, issues had arisen on throughput performance. Essentially, the starting position from a straight-through process was around the 18%. And if you give consideration to transactional volume of 650,000 invoices per annum, that requires a lot of rework. And really, the analysis that we did was to flip that 18% on its head and look at the 82 and split out by vendor, by reason, what was causing the issues. Things as basic as, the vendor doesn't submit the invoice X, Y, and Z. So making sure that the organization had very clear policies and requirements that were documented on invoice submission, goods receipting, inbound document flows. So that sort of, if you like, knucklehead simple submission and simple ingestion piece was clearly articulated to the vendors and monitored for adherence. Then getting into the granular side of why things were failing in a three-way match, by putting it in a matrix, issue and vendor type, we were able to be very specific on some of the issues and tackle those vendor by vendor. But in some instances, the issues were common across multiple vendors. So if you like, you've got a double double bubble on your corrective activity because you solved the problem across several vendors. And that sort of approach on the straight through process alone, we saw the metrics move from that 18% up to mid 60s, and on the volume of 650,000 transactions, Paul, you can imagine the efficiency gain that was achieved there.
Yeah, so that's a great kind of introduction. Maybe to break it down a bit then. So you said the first part was looking at kind of the capture, how invoices were being received, and trying to smooth over some of the issues. Like, how long did that take, and what were the specific steps you went through with the team?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost was documenting what the required ingestion rules were. In this particular instance, we had a third-party offsite provider who would digitalize all of the documents for us and would get them into the ERP. So it was making sure that the communications to that vendor base was very clear as to what the requirements are, because they differed across direct and indirect. And if I'm honest, that was probably about a 4 to 6 month exercise to really refine and get the complete buy-in and adherence to what the policy was. I think the clear gap that we bridged was being crystal clear on what it is that we required and ensuring that that was communicated to the vendor base.
And were you, from your side, singing off one hymn sheet with kind of finance and procurement? Did you guys have the same goals?
Yeah, and I think in the early days, this is where having that close internal collaboration is so important, and managing it in a P2P workspace as opposed to an AP or procurement workspace, because all procurement professionals want their suppliers to be paid on time. It's the same as AP professionals. They want to pay the suppliers on time. If the supplier isn't being paid on time, then there's a problem somewhere in that work stream that, whether it's procurement, accounts payable, possibly even goods inwards or supply chain, need to come together to understand, not just what the problem is, but what the consequences are of that problem, and how that problem just works its way through the workflow and creates a non-payable invoice.
Yeah.
And to my experience, it's always taken a lot more effort to retrospectively correct something than actually spend a little bit longer at the front end and get it right first time.
So step one was kind of documenting and really clarifying how you wanted to receive and capture invoices.
Yeah.
If you had non-compliance then from suppliers and vendors, was it carrot? Was it stick? I guess, how did you drive the right behavior?
I think it's a little bit of both, Paul. What is it that's preventing the supplier from adhering to the requirements? And if I'm frank, generally it was just communication. They hadn't received the right instructions. So the stick didn't have to come out terribly often, but obviously the stick that is there is, if you don't follow the invoice ingestion requirements that we have, you're not going to get paid on time, because significant additional effort needs to be put into capturing your invoice, getting it into the ERP, and then following the approval workflows. Yeah,
and I think that'll give lots of people comfort that you're not fighting the vendor. Maybe just a simple bit of education and clarification is all that's needed to sweep up a lot of the initial problems.
Yeah, I think generally, in my experience, everyone wants to try and do the right thing. They don't necessarily always know what the right thing is, and that's why the communication piece is just so important, to make sure that everyone understands the why.
Okay, so I guess that was part one. It's the clarification of what you want from vendors. It's working across finance and procurement. You said it took about 4 to 6 months. I guess what was then the kind of the next part, or the more internal part, which then drove the straight through processing rate up?
Yeah, so it's what are the failures? So as it's going through the three-way match, we were getting a number of errors coming out as to why invoices weren't being matched, and really, in my mind, the simplest way to visualize this to the team, if you say, right, we're at 18% and I want us to be at 60%, That's quite a big jump, and it's quite difficult to really visualize how you're going to achieve that. So we had a whiteboard in our meeting room that started off at the 18%. We said, right, okay, vendor number one has these issues, these issues, these issues, and if we solve all of those, we'll move from 18 to, I don't know, let's say 25. Next vendor, these issues, these issues, these issues, moves us from 25 to 35. And we literally waterfalled in reverse, if you like, what each step would achieve on the STP to get us to a higher level. And as I said, some of these blocks of movement on the needle, if you like, would be specific to a vendor. In other instances, it was common across multiple vendors. And literally every Monday morning we'd sit, we'd review, the team would have different actions, they'd engage whoever they needed to engage. If it was goods inward, supply chain, procurement, the vendor, IT in some instances. Build a cadence up, and very quickly you can knock these blocks off and you can start seeing the impact on your straight through processing real time as these things are getting closed. You've got a good track as well of not just looking forward as to what needs to be done, but looking back at where you've come from and what you have achieved. That gives you that motivation to keep progressing. And in terms of the granularity of issues, everything from goods not received being the bookings in not being timely or complete, so that the GNI is missing. Purchase order compliance not necessarily being where it needed to be, and then invoice details from the supplier, part number formats. There was a whole range of different issues that needed to be addressed and closed out.
Yeah, I love the idea of that kind of weekly task force, kind of identifying the step change week by week. So I guess how long was that process? How quickly did you see the numbers start to really increase?
Yeah, so I think we started it, if memory serves, about April 19, and if I'm honest, it was probably about an 18-month project before we were starting to hit the markers of 60-65%. And I think that duration, that gestation period, if you like, was building up the story, why this is important, why we just can't keep manually knife and forking invoices through. Yes, okay, we might be paying vendors on time, but it's a bit like a swan. It might look all serene on the outside, but the work that's going on behind the scenes to get these invoices paid was quite furious. And it's great when you hit the mark every time, but if you miss it once, the consequences were not very good. Unhappy supplier, unhappy procurement team. So building up that cross-functional narrative as to why there's a lot of importance attached to this activity. And then some of it, it might seem easy, or when you talk about it, it might sound easy, but the actual physical mechanics of building processes to ensure PO compliance, to ensure robustness of price files, to execute that as well. People have day jobs, and the busy day jobs at that. So trying to squeeze out more time is probably what gave it that 18 months as opposed to anything quicker.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I love that you said before, knife and forking invoices. I like that. It's a good visual description of the process. I like that. And I've been at lots of conferences where the discussion is what's the right percentage of straight through processing to aim for. And I know it will vary a bit by company. Do you feel like 60 was the ceiling there? Could you have pushed it higher? What would have been needed?
No, I think, I've grown up in a shared service environment where the mantra is always do a little bit more each year with a little bit less. You've got to build that efficiency. So I think if you apply that to straight through processing, then, if you're at 65 today, great. Okay, what is it? How do you get to 70 next year? How do you get to 75? How do you get to 80? And keep asking that question over and over again. Could we have got higher? Yeah, I think, a little bit more time, perhaps a bit of technology investment. We could have crept that up to mid 70s. Perhaps a seismic change on how some of the indirects were managed. We could have got that even higher. And I think, certainly from my perspective, it's just trying to get that number a little bit higher each day, each week, each month.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I guess you don't want to run into diminishing returns either, where you're sprinting to make very small differences. I guess you got to keep focusing on how do we get them, the most change from what we're doing.
Absolutely. And I think when you're at 18%, it is quite an easy. You've got quite a lot to go at to make some pretty rapid changes. But for sure, I think the curve always tapers off, and you always plateau at some point.
Yeah, really interesting. Thank you, Phil. As part of the AP Arms, we always do a pub quiz round, which is to caption an image. So I'm just going to share my screen. And when we were looking at this one earlier, we did laugh, didn't we? Because I think the guy on the left does bear a striking resemblance maybe to you. So normally you have a choice of which one you caption, but I think this has naturally led itself to you.
Yeah, I think on that left-hand side one, I can see myself just sort of like, say that again. So yeah, I'd certainly go on the left-hand side. He seems to have a little bit of a suspicious scowl on his face.
This was you on day one, was it? 18%. Yeah, say that again.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Trying to comprehend what's just been said.
Amazing. Cool. Well, look, Phil, thank you so much for sharing just a snippet of your story, and obviously the efficiency you drove in that straight through processing rate. It's been really helpful, and you're a friend of Xelix, so hopefully we'll get you back on the show, back in the AP Arms, maybe for a beer next time. I've got a cough, so I'm on the honey and ginger today, but maybe the next one we can do in a real life pub.
I look forward to it, Paul. Thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure to spend time with you and with the Xelix team, and thanks for affording me the opportunity to talk through some of my experiences.
Great. Thanks, Phil.
Cheers. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.